So simplifying with integers, what we're going to do here is really focus on negative numbers. So the word integers includes negative numbers, 0, and positive numbers. But we've worked a lot with positive numbers, probably worked with 0 quite a bit too. What's usually more difficult for students is the work with negative numbers. So here we're going to go through the different operations, so addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, especially exponents, and then we'll put that together with PEMDAS and following our order of operations. So first let's look at addition. So we have this negative 8 plus 7. So what we're doing here is we're adding two numbers together. We have this big negative number. I do this comparison of like a big negative with some positive. What that means that when we add these together, it's going to end up being negative. What you could do, if it's helpful, is think about this in terms of a number line. So let's say here's negative 8, like that's our starting point. And I'll go 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So what we're doing here is it's like we're standing at negative 8, and then by adding on 7, that's a movement to the right. So it's like we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's how we're going to end up at negative 1 there. So it's starting at a negative value, and then by adding, we're getting larger, which means we're going towards 0. But because that 7's smaller, we end up with a negative number. So this right here is a negative 1. Well, there are so many different ways to go about this, so whatever way makes the most sense to you, absolutely use it. Another way to think of this as thinking about the difference between 8 and 7, which is 1, and then just recognizing that the negative number is bigger, so that'd be negative 1. If this had been a positive 8 with a negative 7, so 8 minus 7, the difference would still be 1. It's just now the negative number smaller, so we would end up with a positive number. So that would be positive 1. All right, this one right here. So sometimes you might see it as 6 plus a negative number. This is the same exact thing as 6 minus 2. A positive and a negative, and we can talk about this again with multiplication. If you have a positive with a negative, it's just going to make a negative. So 6 minus 2 is just a positive 4. Here, a negative 2 plus negative 1, same idea here of positive and negative is really just a negative. So this is really negative 2 minus 1. If I bring up that same idea of the number line, so let's say we're starting at negative 2 here, and here's negative 1, 0, negative 3, negative 4. This is like we're starting at negative 2, and then here I'm subtracting 1, which is a movement to the left-hand side. So what we would do here is go to the left 1, which would land us at negative 3. This right here is equal to negative 3. Sometimes I describe this to myself as having a negative number and then making it even more negative. Like if you have something negative and then take away from it, you're just moving further and further down this negative number line. All right, then subtraction with a negative number, which we actually just did. It looked like addition, but it's simplified to subtraction. This is the same idea of having a negative number and then making it even more negative with the subtraction of 7. So what we could do is like we're at negative 8, and then we're moving to the left 7 more spots. So it's kind of like adding these together, like an 8 plus 7 is 15. So it's that we're making this larger value, but it's just becoming more negative in terms of the number line that we're working with. So I would make a negative 15. So if you have negative and negative working together, it's going to stay negative, and then you could think of it as an addition of those two values there. Right here, we have 6 minus a negative 2. Now a negative with a negative like this, and this is going to come up with multiplication down below there, this actually makes a positive. So this is the same thing as 6 plus 2, which is just 8. So if you have subtraction of a negative number, it becomes addition. Here, we saw our negative number come through here, or it's just subtraction of a number. So that's where it became more negative. But seeing these double negatives together makes a positive. And same idea with this one here. We have a negative there, but we have subtraction of a negative number, which is the same thing as addition of that number. So we have a -2 and we're adding 1. This is similar to the first example we looked at, where we have kind of this larger negative number. So it's getting bigger, it's moving towards 0, but it's going to stay negative. This would be a -1. And again, if it helps, you could think in terms of the number line, where we're starting at -2, and then by adding 1, we're moving to the right by 1. And that would land us at -1. So get some practice with these, and especially simplifying when you see kind of two operations next to each other, of how that simplifies to subtraction versus how it simplifies to addition, because that can help simplify the calculations. All right, multiplication and division. So some pieces I talked about up above there is if you're multiplying a positive and a negative, that's going to make a negative number. And the order doesn't matter. It could be negative times positive. That would also make a negative. Then if you take a negative times a negative, that's going to make a positive. And then I guess I can also include in here positive times positive makes a positive. It just stays positive. So those are the rules we want to use here. So I have a negative and a positive multiplying together here. So that means we're going to end up with a negative number. So that's the first thing I think of with these, is just what type of number do we have, positive or negative? Then the calculation is pretty direct in that you just think about multiplying those two numbers together. So 2 times 4 is 8. In terms of symbols, let's actually talk about that real quick. So -2 star 4 versus -2.4 versus -2 x4. These are all symbols of multiplication, just different systems use different symbols, but they all mean multiplication. So you might sometimes see the star, you might sometimes see the dot. However, the X symbol, we are not going to see that often. We'll see it come up with scientific notation, but really in algebra, we avoid this case because we start using X as a variable that we want to solve for, and it can get confusing if you have X, and X together. Then it's hard to see which is multiplication, which is our variable, so we avoid that case as much as we can. All right. Negative times negative is going to make a positive value, so I'm just going to make a mental note that it's positive. 3 times 6 is 18, so my final answer there is going to be positive 18. Same thing is true with division. So negative divided by a positive is going to give a negative result. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now something to note here is that -4 over 2 is the same thing as +4 over -2. It is also the same thing as if you see the negative in front of everything, and then 4 divided by 2. All of these calculate to that -2 right there. So it's either just a negative in the numerator, or just a negative in the denominator, or the negative is out front. Same idea here, 6 divided by -3, so positive divided by negative will give a negative. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Okay, let's talk about exponents. So 3 squared, this is telling me to take 3 times 3, which is 9. Now, that's a case we've dealt with before. However, moving to negative numbers, we want to be very careful. It's all going to depend on parentheses. So the parentheses is grouping everything together. In fact, with the exponents, I think of it as affecting what's closest to it. So like in this case, it's affecting that 3 right there. With the parentheses, the exponent is hitting the parentheses, meaning it's that entire thing that's being squared. So what this would look like is taking the parentheses with -3 times the parentheses with -3. Well, negative times a negative is a positive, so this is going to be +9. In this next case, though, and I'm going to show these at the same time so that we compare because they are different. Here, the 2, that exponent of 2, what's closest to it is the 3. So it's the 3 that's being squared. This negative is just out front. And how you could even think of it is having a -1 times 3 squared. That's really a breakdown of what we're seeing here. So that -1 we would just keep out front because order of operations, we would simplify exponents first. So this is really like -1 times 3 times 3, which would be a -1 times 9, which is a -9. So notice the difference here that with the parentheses, it became positive because the negative got squared. Here, without the parentheses, the negative is just hanging out front. Really what we're squaring is just that number 3. So with that, we end up with a negative number because the negative is not being squared. And that's really the difference between these. The negative is squared versus the negative is not squared. So just really be careful of that case right there. And then our last one here is just to put negatives kind of everywhere. So we have the 2 cases. We have this negative hanging out front, and what I like to do is just write that as a -1 times. And then what I'm going to focus on is this piece right here, which that -3 in parentheses squared means those parentheses are getting squared. So we'd have -3 in parentheses times -3 in parentheses. So this is a -1 times. Well, negative times negative makes a positive. 3 times 3 is 9. So -1 times 9 is -9. So those are cases with exponents and what parentheses do, especially when working with negative numbers. All right, our last piece here is just kind of tie it all together with our order of operations. So thinking about PEMDAS. So first thing we want to deal with is the parentheses. So here I'm focusing on that 2 minus 5. So inside those parentheses, 2 minus 5 is a -3 because I have something small and subtracting something big. Again, if it helps to think in terms of a number line, let's see. I'm going to go put 2 over here. 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. It's like we're starting at number 2, and then taking away 5 means we move to the left 5 spots, which would take us to that -3. All right, that -3 is getting squared in the parentheses there. Then we have times 2 and a +1. So the next thing I want to take care of is that exponent of 2. So I have my parentheses. So this, if it helps, you can write it out as -3 times -3. And then we have that times 2 plus 1. I have this string of multiplication here, so I'm just going to move left to right. So -3 times -3 is +9. Then 9 times 2 is 18. Then we have the +1. 18 plus 1, 19. So notice that that +1 just hangs out until the very end, and that's because addition is the last thing we do. We did a little subtraction at first, but it's because it was inside those parentheses. All right, one more here. So let's see, we have these parentheses. So I want to focus on this set of parentheses. Inside of there, what you can do is restart PEMDAS. So you could do parentheses again, but that -2 that's inside the parentheses there is all simplified. So really that's just coming through as multiplication of a 7 times -2. And so in terms of PEMDAS, we would do that first. So 7 times -2 is -14. Since the positive times the negative is negative, plus 16, and then divided by 2. And we just keep simplifying those parentheses, so negative 14 plus 16. And if it helps, you can rewrite that as positive 16 minus 14. If that's easier for you, that's absolutely correct. So 16 minus 14 is 2, and then divided by 2, which is going to be equal to 1. So that's our work with negative numbers. This can be a good one to look at the textbook for more examples and explanations. Also with these, I'm including my videos, and then with the problems down below, there should be some attached videos for a little more explanation. There's also Khan Academy is a great resource. So if this is something that's a little rusty for you, there's lots of resources out there. And if you're unsure, just reach out to me and I can help guide you to some more.